What makes a perfect movie? Does that even exist? And if so, what do I put on the list of perfect movies? It's coming up on The New Adventures of Indiana Jim, Episode 8, for September 7th, 2025.
Coming to you not exactly live from...
The cliffs of insanity!
It must be Indiana Jim.
All right, welcome back to The New Adventures of Indiana Jim. I've got a little slightly different format for the show today, or for this week. And when I get to the end of the podcast, after we have our main discussion, I'm going to kind of talk about briefly why I made that choice and what the show is going to look like going forward. Because I need to make a bit of a change, but I'm going to talk about that when we get to the end. First, we're going to have our discussion period where we're going to talk about the topic that I brought up right before the intro, which is what makes a perfect movie. How can we even use that expression? Is that even possible? Is it too suggestive? Is it too subjective to use that expression to say that something is a perfect movie? I think there are some that will qualify, but I think that the criteria, again, can be specific to the viewer and the person looking at the movies. So we'll talk about that, and I would love to get your feedback. So if you're new to the program, I am Indiana Jim, your intrepid arch-geekologist. And here we hunt for treasure across the world of entertainment, including books, movies, TV, and music, and we traverse the wild frontiers of podcasting and publishing. For that feedback, you can email your thoughts to indianajimpodcasts@gmail.com, and I will feature your comments in the next episode. That is indianajimpodcasts@gmail.com. If you are watching on YouTube or listening via Substack, you can leave your comments below the video or in the post for this episode. Also, if you would like to send a voice memo, I don't have a voicemail line, but if you want to record your thoughts and have them on the show, you can record them on your computer or your smartphone and email them to that email address, which is, again, indianajimpodcasts@gmail.com. So let's get right into the content of what we're talking about, because one of the things that I hate about podcasts is when you list a topic for your show and you don't even get to the topic until 10, 13, 15, 20 minutes into your episode. By that time, generally, I've checked out. And the reason why is people want their listener to stick around for the good stuff, but we feel like we have to say all this talky talk bit before we get to the good stuff. Just like a podcast with an interview. If you're going to have an interview with somebody and I want to hear the interview with that person, I want to hear that first, and then I'll decide whether I want to keep listening to your small talk and your catching up. You know, I hate panel podcasts that start with, "Hey, what'd you do this weekend?" I don't want to hear that. So enough of the talkity talk. Let's get into the discussion right now. Is there such a thing as a perfect movie, or is perfection in film just an illusion? Well, we're going to talk about the criteria that defines what a perfect movie is, what movies I would put on that list and why, and some movies that fall short of that criteria and why I think they may not be as perfect as we would like them to be. So, what do we mean by perfect movie? Well, some people, and I think this is fair to say, that they argue that flawlessness for a movie or perfection, it's more about wholeness. It's about every element feeling necessary in harmony with each other, and they serve the story of the movie. That, I think that's a good way to think about it. First, I think for a perfect movie, clearly the filmmakers have to achieve what they're going for. And I think that has to do more with the genre or the tone of the film. A So, apologies to those watching on YouTube, but my phone came unplugged from the computer and promptly died, which is what I was using for my camera. So, there's no more video of my face. But feel free to gaze at this gorgeous album artwork for the podcast. We now return you to the podcast already in progress. A film noir, for instance, can't be compared to some Technicolor film on cinematography because I think those are two different styles of cinematography. Can't say a black and white film is terrible because it has no color, and you can't say a color film is awful because it's not in black and white. Obviously, you can't do that. It also relates to genre. So a perfect comedy is going to be trying to do different things than a perfect drama film. A drama film that is unintentionally funny probably is not perfect. It can be considered a masterpiece, but maybe sometimes for the wrong reason. And you don't want to go into a Mel Brooks movie taking it seriously. Does the filmmaker achieve what they want to achieve? The second thing is you have to be true to the rules of your universe. You can't break the rules that you establish. You can't have characters get out of situations because you wrote yourself into a corner and have to find some way to get them out of it. One of the ways that we see this done to achieve a comic effect is in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when you get to the end of the movie and there's no clear way to end this story. So what do? They break the fourth wall. They chalk it up to like it's an independent film production and they just got broken up by the police and they get taken away in a squad car. Similar to the way they end Blazing Saddles, although it is kind of a satisfactory sort of Western style ending, but then they get into a limo and they drive off and you see that the buildings are just facades held up by 2x4s as they drive off into the sun. So you've been on a movie set this entire time. Things like that. Those are intentional breakings of the rules of the movie's universe. One of the reasons that the ruby slippers and clicking the heels for Dorothy works in that movie is because it's a dream sequence. You don't want to do that again because The Wizard of Oz already did that perfect. But this is a way in which, you can just wish yourself back home. Well, that doesn't fit with there's no rules to that. And the fact that it's a dream sequence makes it work according to the rules of the film. So that sense of being true to the rules of your universe, you can't really define it, but you know it when it happens. This is important. They do not depend on any other material for you to understand what is happening. You shouldn't have to watch a TV show or read a comic book to understand what's going on, or to get the import of what's going on, or to get the emotional resonance of what's happening. So like Avengers Endgame may be a great ending to a sprawling, decade-spanning film saga, and you might think it's a perfect ending, but it doesn't fit as a perfect movie by itself. It definitely achieves what it sets out to do, but the audience can't see how well they achieved it without having seen what has come before. This is the primary weakness of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. They violate one of the core principles of sequential storytelling, which is the characters must progress along their arcs on screen. So the victory that they earned at the end of Return of the Jedi is squandered off screen so that we return to the central characters at a place that has not been earned. It was a cheat. And that's why so many viewers were put off by their heroes being made into has-beens and losers. A perfect movie should also be able to stand up to multiple viewings, with subtle nuance and new discoveries to be gleaned over those multiple viewings. But because the vast majority of people don't see a movie more than once, if you can't convey the core of what you are seeking to convey in a single viewing, then it can't be a perfect movie. Take, for instance, The 13th Warrior. This is one of my favorite films. And there's a reason it's inaccessible to so many viewers, and a lot of that can be attributed to the competing visions between John McTiernan and Michael Crichton. John McTiernan was making more of a horror movie, and Michael Crichton wanted to make it more of a traditional adventure yarn. And so you can kind of see the tug of war between those two visions. So that, number one, is one reason why the movie suffers. But the stakes of the story, they're not clear at the outset. We understand that Ahmed ibn Fadlan has been kicked out of Baghdad because he was in love with a nobleman's wife, and he was sent far to the north to be an ambassador to the Northmen, right? But we don't really get the sense of why this is important to him. We just sort of see him being dragged along. We know that he's afraid for his life because he doesn't want to go off with these guys. And we know he has some built-in prejudices against the Northmen, but they're not really explored. They're not really examined. All of this is really just implied. And in fact, the protagonist of the story, the one that's actually driving the story, is Bulvai, and Ahmed is the viewer. He's the chronicler of this story, but there is a conflict for this character, but it's mostly internal and it's implied, as I said, rather than stated outright. So to get the 13th Warrior, you first have to enjoy the spectacle, the adventure of it, the exquisite cinematography, and sort of absorb the film before you grasp the kernel of the story, which is kind of revealed at the end. And then when you go back and watch it and you can see it playing out over the course of the story, it becomes one of the most beautiful stories on film. And I say that with zero irony. I absolutely love this movie. Now, if you come into the film with an understanding of the Beowulf story or a familiarity with the story of Ahmed ibn Fadlan, you may immediately recognize what is happening, but general audiences didn't, and that's why the film was received rather tepidly, both by audiences at the box office and by critics. Then there is technical quality, and that includes things like cinematography, visual language, set design, special effects, sound effects, and musical score. These things are less important unless the film is an exploration of these attributes. But more often than not, they take a backseat to the narrative taking place on the screen. So in that sense, the definition of what makes a perfect film sort of eclipses the scope of this discussion, especially if it's specifically about the images themselves, about the cinematography itself. General audiences aren't all that interested in watching your cinematography tone poem, but they are interested in being entertained and getting a good story. So let's look at some specific, other specific criteria. So narrative structure, right? It needs to be a good screenplay. It needs to be a good story. The story is easy to follow without being overly simplistic. There are some complex themes at play that you can see. But every scene advances the plot or develops the character. One of those two things. The pacing is good, right? Good pacing, feels inevitable, never rushed or never lags. It just sort of goes at a proper pace. So think of like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Has a good, even pace. Action and reaction, an action scene with a lot of momentum, and then a scene where we kind of dial it back a little bit. So there's almost like it's a breathing to it. And then a payoff and a resolution. Your setups lead to satisfying payoffs, J.J. Abrams. Like the mystery box thing just absolutely drives me crazy because you have a bunch of setups with no payoffs whatsoever. And so you don't get the sense of completion. Now, Back to the Future is one of those that really pays off the setup. So that's important. Characters are important. Are the characters memorable and distinct? Are they immediately recognizable and consistent throughout the course of your story? Indiana Jones, right? He's kind of the same guy, though he does grow a little bit, but not as much because that style of movie, that style of story is not really one where the character is experiencing a change per se. Complexity. They're not just archetypes. They can surprise us, but they stay true to their core. When you watch something like Firefly, that's another good example. That's a good example where the characters are archetypal. There's no real growth. There's no real transformation. There's just a little bit of transformation, but not a whole lot. And I think, honestly, that's why further seasons of Firefly probably would not have been as satisfying, because I think there's only so far you can go with that. The audience must witness a meaningful change, or in the case of like Citizen Kane, a refusal to change. A meaningful change can be two different ways. It can be like in Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker goes from the callow youth who whines about his lot in life to he's a galactic hero who destroyed the Death Star. 13th Warrior is another good one, right? Ibn Fadlan is this pampered poet from Baghdad who has to get in the dirt and the mud with the Northmen and become, as he says, a useful servant of God. He has to go from this poet, this artist, to being a warrior and a fighter. You can also look at a negative change, like in The Godfather, where Michael Corleone wants nothing to do with the family business, but by the end he's become the Godfather. And that's a negative arc. Is the film quotable? Do the lines from the film stick in the cultural conscience? So consciousness is what I mean to say, like Casablanca. Here's looking at you, kid. Play it again, Sam. We'll always have Paris, right? There's all of these lines that you remember from that movie, or things from The Princess Bride. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die, right? The Three Musketeers. Come, D'Artagnan, we're saving the king. I love that movie too. So there's quotability. We remember the lines. The dialogue has a natural rhythm that it feels true to the character, but also heightened for dramatic effect or comic effect. And then there's subtext. Characters say one thing but mean another, and that can usually be conveyed visually or through what the character is doing or how they say it. Visual storytelling, cinematography. Every shot serves the story. It has to serve the film. The editing feels invisible, yet there's a purpose to it, and editing can establish a natural rhythm to the film. So it serves the pacing, like we talked about with the screenplay. Maybe it has some iconic imagery, like the twin sunset in Star Wars. You can take a still from that scene and everybody recognizes it. Then there's an emotional resonance. The film has an immediate impact, and this goes back to how is it viewed in the initial viewing. You get the emotional impact of the film right off. You don't have to see it a second time to really understand what the director or screenwriter is going for. It has a lasting effect. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. But these iconic, perfect films, they linger with us years later, and we think about them, and we ponder them, and we want to rewatch them. Even if it's culturally specific, it's still relatable. So a lot of anime is based on, things from Eastern myths and Eastern culture, yet can still be relatable to American audiences. What about thematic depth? There are layers of meaning. So it works both as surface entertainment and maybe as a commentary. There's a lot of that in something like the Coen brothers, in No Country for Old Men, or even Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, is based on a deeper myth, the Odyssey, or is the Iliad? I don't remember. It's both a Southern surrealist comedy, but there are deep underlying themes behind the laughs. Let's see, moral or philosophical weight, right? Star Wars has a lot of moral lessons deep underneath the hero's journey. And then there's interpretive richness, so you can revisit it at different stages of life and find new things. So generational applicability. In The Incredibles, you have different characters at different stages of their life. What's it like to be the hero who everyone loves? And then what's it like to be an older man who's trying to figure out his place in the world, his relevance to people? You have Dash, who's like 8 years old, an 8-year-old boy who's going through different things and experiencing life through a different lens than the sister who's a teenager and going through all the teenage problems, and then mom and dad being parents. And then, so you see all these different stages of life at work in something like The Incredibles. And so all of that can resonate with different people and at different times of your life. Then there's a cultural and historical impact. So it influences other filmmakers or inspires other filmmakers or creates entire genres or movements. Star Wars did that. Rocky was a great example of inspiring the sports genre. Now, that wasn't the first sports movie ever made, but Rocky has an enduring legacy and effect on films that followed up. Like The Karate Kid is very much like Rocky, except Daniel LaRusso is in a completely different phase of life. He's a teenager in high school versus this washed up boxer. But it's kind of a similar story. And then that film is quoted or parodied or referenced constantly. So things like Rocky, things like The Princess Bride, things like The Karate Kid or Back to the Future or, The Godfather. These things are often referenced and often parodied, like I said. Then lastly, we have a balance of artistry and entertainment. So a perfect movie can thread the needle between both critical acclaim and audience appreciation. So you strike a balance. It's not just a cult classic that critics hated, and not just a critical success that audiences didn't go see. A perfect movie is going to bridge the gap between the two of those. Now, that's not to say you can't have cult classics that are viewed more favorably later in life or later in their lifetime or our lifetime or over time, whatever you want to say. And that critics maybe at the time didn't get it and they didn't receive it well, but later critics or later viewers will find all the benefits in it. And it's not like it doesn't have to be technically flawless. Star Wars was not technically flawless, and even with all the changes that George Lucas made to the movie, they're still not without their flaws. So despite that, it feels good to watch. You might have a movie with some awkward blue screen stuff, or go back to Jason and the Argonauts and the stop motion animation, but it still feels good to watch that movie because you recognize it was good and innovative for its time. So, what are some examples of perfect movies? And what would be on my list? Well, probably my top 5, starting with Casablanca. I think that Casablanca is one of those perfectly paced stories, one of those perfectly constructed screenplays. You understand what's at stake for each of the characters. You understand what's at stake in the larger world of the movie. You understand the principles at play. You can see the tug of war in Rick between his bitterness towards Ilsa, his enduring love for Ilsa, his desire to take care of himself. I don't stick my neck out for anybody. Yet he wants to help that young couple get their papers because at heart he's a romantic. They even he's even called on this in the film. He's a romantic at heart. But the dialogue is timeless. It's iconic. It's again considered a perfect movie, and in fact, its perfection is probably it's evidence that there's a God, because all the problems in the production and the fact that so many different people worked on this script and so many different people worked on the film and making the movie, and all of that came together to make one of the most enduring stories of all time. It's really just an incredible testament to people putting things together at the last minute to make something really great. And Star Wars is kind of similar to that. Number 2, Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's one of those screenplays that is taught in screenwriting classes. It's pure adventure. The pacing is flawless. There's no wasted scenes, and one of the greatest scores ever set to film. from John Williams. And obviously, I'm a big fan because my name is Indiana Jim, and there's something about that alliteration that comes from Indiana Jones. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Indiana Jones. Harrison Ford became an iconic actor because of Indiana Jones. And I don't think there's anybody out there that you might not like adventure genre films, but I really doubt there's anybody out there that doesn't think Raiders of the Lost Ark is a good or great story. Back to the Future is another perfect setup and payoff. You have a balance of humor and heart to it. You have not only the adventure, but also the emotional resonance of being kind of a nerdy kid in high school, not really having a lot of friends. You have a short fused temper for Marty McFly, who's got to go back and figure out how do I can't just be cool and stand up to bullies. I have to find a way to get George, get my dad and my mom back together. So he's got to kind of use the powers of persuasion. There's a whole lot of different elements at play in Back to the Future, and it's just a perfect story. And again, another iconic, beautiful cinematic score. Like the music to that movie, not just the underscore, but also the incidental music and the rock and roll songs that are used in the film to convey each period. It's just one of those masterpieces of filmmaking. And again, I don't think you can look at that and say, pick out a lot of problems with it. And where there are problems in the time travel logic, of course, time travel is impossible. So you can kind of make it up as you go along. Well, how did that work? Well, I don't really know how that works. And parallel universes and dimensional blah, blah, blah. Who cares? It's a great movie. And I will have words with those who think anything different. What about The Karate Kid? This is one of those movies that was very important in my life. This one and The Karate Kid too. But specifically because I struggled with bullies and being ganged up on and being socially awkward and being a nerd and not really being attractive to girls and this whole thing. The whole thing that Daniel LaRusso goes through and how Mr. Miyagi helps him to find his self-confidence, to find his strength, internal fortitude, and also the conversation between the love of the game or the love of the sport versus the integrity of the sport, and cheating and overcoming the more powerful antagonist by reaching within yourself and discovering who you are, and the whole thing. And another movie that's just perfectly paced. The emotional resonance is there from the beginning. We see who Daniel LaRusso is when they move out there from, I guess it was New York, that fish out of water sort of thing. What about Jurassic Park? Jurassic Park does more than just be a horror movie about dinosaurs or an adventure film about paleontologists. It has all of it. It has the elements of horror films, but also has the wonder and grandeur of adventure, and also has the philosophical debate within science fiction about whether or not this is a thing that should be done, if it could be done, and what are the consequences of man's hubris. But ultimately, it's just so satisfying to watch on all levels, and the special effects were not overdone. They didn't overreach. They didn't try to do too much. And watching it today, it still holds up, even though you can sort of see, you can see the seams a little bit now being 2025, but was it 30 years later or something? But that's to be expected. Regardless, the story as it appears on screen is perfect. What are some other ones? Those are my top 5, but I think The Princess Bride can be considered a perfect film. And you can look at that and go, well, the music it's all done on synthesizer, and it was Mark Knopfler, who's a guitar player, and We don't have a real orchestra. It's kind of cheesy. You can tell it's on a sound stage. And if it just occurred self-contained, as it was, we drop in, we see Buttercup and Wesley, and on the farm, and that's it. And the story progresses as is. Well, maybe not a perfect movie, but the fact that what we see on screen in the movie, the action of the movie, is taking place inside the imagination of a kid homesick from school being read a story by his grandfather, and the interruptions of the narrators. It all works perfectly, and we buy the conceit. It just goes together as a cohesive whole, and that's important. What about a movie that maybe doesn't feel so good at the end? How about a tragedy like Chinatown? One of those scripts, again, that is technically considered fairly flawless as far as I know. I've not done any deep insight, but it's another one of those scripts that is taught in screenwriting class. And it's a perfect tragedy because the fact that it's not a happy ending kind of makes it more perfect than if it was a happy ending, because the sad ending is kind of the point of the movie. And you can have a philosophical debate on whether a film should inspire us towards joy and hope rather than despair. But that's just kind of the hard-boiled and film noir elements. Shakespeare, his comedies and tragedies are equally important, regardless of which genre they fall in. Jaws. This is another miracle of editing, is how do we take this movie that spent all this money on this mechanical shark that doesn't even work, and how do we make the film work? And they stumble upon the idea of using the music to signify the shark, using just the fin to signify the shark, and the fact that what is unseen is often more terrifying than anything that can be shown on screen. And in that, Spielberg both kind of created or reinvigorated the monster movie, but also kind of ruined it too, because so many people after Jaws continue to want to just show the monster. But I think this is why Jurassic Park in so many different ways works so well, because when you don't see the raptor tearing up the cow, you just see the cow go down, and then you see the harness come up and it's all torn to shreds. And then when you see the goat in the rain, and then the goat is suddenly gone. And it's not that you see the goat gone, it's you see the goat gone through the night vision goggles. So there's almost this claustrophobic sense of looking through the night vision goggles, and you don't see everything. You only see the fact that the goat is gone, so your vision is restricted. And then you see the vibrations in the glass of water. Now, of course, you do see the dinosaur, you do see the monsters, but it works differently than it does in Jaws. You've established the terror of it without seeing it before you see it. So it's not just the simple shock of seeing the monster. It's seeing the effects of the monster first. The Godfather, another one of those screenplays that's taught in screenwriting class. Another perfect character journey, a negative arc. Schindler's List. Personally, this is personally, I think Schindler's List is a perfect film. It is not just a tragedy. It's not just a docudrama. There is a sense of hope. There is the sense of doing good for people, has a legacy. When you see all the survivors of the Holocaust and their descendants at the end of the film, putting the flowers on the grave of Oskar Schindler, you see beauty and you see hope in the midst of despair. And you see the courage of a man who doesn't understand at first what he's involved in, and then only at the end does he really get the gravity of the situation. And while it is heartbreaking and it is disturbing, it's so good. It's so beautiful. And the score, again, John Williams, a master. My son's named after him. The greatest composer probably who ever lived. Definitely the greatest film composer who ever lived and still lives. And finally, my top 11, I guess, just threw out a bunch, but Star Wars. Star Wars, despite its flaws, despite the difficulties, despite the problems, is one of the perfect movies. And the adherence to the hero's journey structure, the mythic underpinnings, the social commentary at the heart of it, the personal and spiritual commentary at the heart of it, just a beautiful movie. And one of the obviously established a genre. It inspired generations of filmmakers, inspired generations of fans. Another perfect film. Now, let's talk about a few that were almost perfect. Not quite. So, Tombstone is a great Western with great performances and great cinematography. But Tombstone itself suffers from a bit of an identity crisis. So I forget who the original director was going to be. The first director was having problems going off schedule, was just taking way too long. The conditions were awful because it was hot, and people were unhappy. The studio was unhappy, and eventually he got kicked off or forced off the picture or left the picture. I don't remember what it was. But there's this kind of idea that Kurt Russell sort of took over and that is sort of turned into a more Wyatt Earp-focused movie than probably it would have been at the outset. But for the most part, the movie works like that. And Kurt Russell is arguably the most important star in the movie. Val Kilmer, of course, steals the show as Doc Holliday. And the other actors were no slouches themselves. But the issue with Tombstone is when we get to the Vendetta ride. Because the film has done a great job establishing the stakes for the characters and setting up the dramatic events of the fight on Fremont Street, otherwise sometimes known as the shooting at the OK Corral. When we get to the aftermath, we're still at a great pace. We still see the drama of the attempted assassination of Virgil, and then the successful, spoiler alert, killing of Morgan. When Wyatt Earp kills the guy at the train station, I don't remember his name, but I study this all the time. One of my favorite stories is the Old West, and I can't even remember the guy's name that got killed on the train tracks. But when they kill the guy on the train tracks, he utters that iconic line, "You tell him I'm coming and hell's coming with me," something that Wyatt Earp didn't say. And it's not in keeping with Wyatt Earp's more stoic demeanor. He wasn't a loudmouth. He didn't talk, or he talked, but he didn't use his mouth. And from the minute he utters that line, which is totally out of character, the movie falls off the rails because now it becomes a montage. So you have this huge buildup, and now Wyatt Earp's going to go exact his revenge, and it's a montage. And I think the emotional context of the film fizzles out, and we take a shortcut to get us to the point where Wyatt says goodbye to Doc Holliday and he passes away, spoiler alert, and then Wyatt is reunited with Josephine. And while it's cool and still iconic, it sort of is a tonal shift a little bit, and I feel like it rushes to the ending. That doesn't make it any less watchable. I just think that's where it loses its perfect status. Now, another one that comes real close, has a real great screenplay, has wonderful music, has a great hero's journey, has terrific acting performances except from the lead, and that is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I love Kevin Costner, okay? But dropping this guy with an American accent in the middle of England, I love the movie to death. It's one of my favorite films from my childhood. But obviously the star of the film is Alan Rickman as the Sheriff of Nottingham. But everyone in the movie has an accent appropriate to the period, except for the lead actor. And that's the one reason why I look at Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves and go, It's a great Robin Hood movie. It's not a perfect Robin Hood movie, nor is it a perfect movie to begin with. Another Kevin Costner vehicle, Field of Dreams. And I love Field of Dreams, and the last time I watched it, I cried my eyes out. The problem with Field of Dreams, and I realize there's a bit of surrealism here, right? We built a baseball diamond in a cornfield, and then the ghosts of old baseball players show up. It's like, how does this happen? We don't really know, so it kind of gives us an out when we get to the end of the movie. And if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert on Field of Dreams. But when James Earl Jones' character is invited to join the baseball players and walks out into that cornfield and disappears, like, where did he go? How does that work? He's not a ghost. He's a living person. So there's a bit of the unexplainable. There's the bit where Ray meets the doctor, and then the doctor shows up as the young player who didn't get his chance to play in the majors. And so he gets to play with the majors, play with the ghosts of these great players. And then when the daughter falls off the grandstand and is choking, he has to leave the diamond and becomes the old man again. But how the old man gets to interact bodily with the child. And so it's full of all these shortcuts. It's full of all these, we'll just do it because it's great. It's what it stands for that is more meaningful than the accepting the reality or the conceit of the film. It doesn't try too hard to establish any grounded reason why all of this works, because that's not really the point. So in one sense, it's not a perfect movie because there's things that just happen out of narrative convenience because we want them to happen. But on the other side of that, there's a perfect emotional resonance to the movie because of it accomplishes what it's trying to do. And then lastly, another adventure piece, another period adventure piece, takes place in 13th century France, where no one, and I mean no one, except the queen and her handmaiden speak in a French accent. Tim Curry is English. And then, again, I love this movie, one of my favorite movies of all time, one I rewatch all the time. But Charlie Sheen and Kiefer Sutherland and Oliver Platt and Chris O'Donnell, zero French accents among them, but they are awesome. So I think it's just funny, some of the things they say. Sometimes Oliver Platt will pronounce D'Artagnan, right, in a French accent, but for the most part, not French accents. And I think, honestly, the film would probably be exhausting if everyone spoke in a French accent. So I think there's that. Obviously, the other Dumas movie, The Man in the Iron Mask, they don't speak in French accents there either, except for Gérard Depardieu, who, of course, is French. So anyway, that's kind of why I would leave The Three Musketeers. A great screenplay, perfectly paced, wonderful adventure, but kind of shallow, and it lacks some of the depth of Star Wars or The Princess Bride or Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's a fun romp, and it's charming. So that's some of my almost perfects, but I'd love to hear from you. If you can drop a comment or an email at indianajimpodcasts@gmail.com, because even a movie that we consider a perfect film will have its flaws. And sometimes those imperfections add charm to the movie. So just like in Star Wars or just like in Field of Dreams, some of these things may be considered imperfections, but they add something to the film and they're enjoyable despite these imperfections. And of course, art is subjective in the end. That one person's perfect movies will not be the same as another person's perfect movies, but there are certain elements of criticism that are considered universal qualities in films. So you could really enjoy Star Wars: The Last Jedi for what it did and tried to do, while at the same time you can see that there's a lot of idiot plot at work and other various problems that I won't go into. So anyway, love to hear your opinions. Please send those emails to indianajympodcasts@gmail.com. Send your voicemails, your voice memos, your voice recordings, etc. So if you're still listening right now, you are one of the OGs, and I thank you so very much for being here and listening this long. This podcast went a lot longer than I had anticipated. I definitely wasn't thinking, oh yeah, this is going to go like 2 hours. But there was a lot there, and I'm just very grateful for anyone who is still watching or still listening. So I promised at the outset of this recording that I would talk a little bit about the podcast and kind of why I did what I did and why I chose the format that I chose. And when I was doing the regular format with the news and everything, when you know, I want to have some good news headlines, things to talk about, and then a topic for discussion, it created a lot of prep work. So what I did this week was I tried to shorten my prep time. I had to work this Saturday, so I didn't have a lot of time for prep. It takes a lot of time on Sunday because Sunday is the day that I choose to do this, that I choose to do the recording. For whatever reason, I'm not capable of just sitting down, turning things on, and recording a podcast. Like, I fooled around with my setup. Like, what do I want my background to be? Because I don't like this background. Just this thing and the bookshelf and the lamp over here. I can't do this. This background sucks. And so I've been doing like kind of the blank monocolored curtain thing. Because I don't have a good nerdy backdrop. And in my space, I don't have the ability to create a backdrop that works for YouTube videos. I use my phone. And so the battery on my phone died while I was using it in the middle of the podcast. One of the time constraints I had was that I'm a bit of a sports fan, not a huge sports fan, but I do like watching the 49ers. So being Sunday, football's on, the game's on at 4:30. So I have a time constraint between getting home from church, getting the podcast set up, getting it recorded, and getting it done before the game comes on. And in fact, when I finished recording, the game had already started. So prep and recording time is intruding on the writing time. And what I thought I could do was get a consistent setup. So I have a nice tension curtain rod thing. I'm going to have some heavier theater style curtains from floor to ceiling, so I can use the long throw background again or cut off more of the noise. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. I want to be able to use my time for writing because I feel like that's a more important use of my time. But I enjoy doing this still, even with that being said. I'm thinking about going monthly instead and really deciding what it is I want to talk about. I've thought about just going for shorter, bite-sized episodes once a week, but the editing is still, I'm a perfectionist when it comes to editing. Is at least audio quality is a big deal for me. That's why I've been so focused on working through my audio. So, for instance, I didn't use Hush at all for this week. And one of the things is I don't have the money to pay for it because it is a $90 app. I have a nice noise gate effect that I found. It's in Apple. It's in GarageBand with a nice, instead of the regular noise gate, which is like an instant cutoff, I found a noise gate that allows you to create a nice roll off. So when you have a breath at the end, it stays open a little longer and shuts off a little more gradually. And that, to me, I think may have better results for what I'm going for. Because if I was doing a professional voiceover in a room that didn't have the fan going and didn't have, all this noise that I had to worry about, I don't like noise gates because when you start talking, the noise is allowed to come in while you're talking. But if your talking is sufficiently louder than the noise, then the noise gets kind of covered up by the talking anyway. And so I feel like if I'm trying to record voiceovers, little chunks, I'm trying to eliminate reverb, make it sound like a booth where Hush isn't trying to work so hard. And I think it worked okay by dialing it back to about 50%. I think last time it worked fine, but there's still no replacement for natural treatment, natural noise reduction. Even a noise gate effect can be very helpful. It can also, again, like if you use the default noise gate in GarageBand, it just instant cut off, so it just doesn't sound natural. And so we all have to kind of look at our situation and go, okay, how much is it helping me versus the extra time it takes? And it doesn't take a whole lot of time to process the extra files, but just continuing to play with it and mess with it. And that's why I have this microphone instead of this microphone. This is a really nice microphone. It was cheap and nice. The Fiduce something 40, I don't know. It's like styled after a Heil PR40 as far as the name goes. Visually supposed to resemble an SM7B or whatever their podcasting version of it is. The USB version. Honestly, really nice microphone. Picks up a wide range, gets a lot of nice character, a lot of low-end character, a lot of high-end character. The whole spectrum sounds really good. The problem is it sounds too good. And so it almost acts like a condenser and picks up way more of the quality of my voice than I want right now. The other difference is because the SM58 is a little more balanced, it doesn't have as much life. It doesn't have as much character. It doesn't sound as good to my ear. But because of what it doesn't pick up, because of what it's not sensitive to, works better in the interim for what I'm doing. I really love the medium of podcasting, and that's why I like to do it. But I do need to reduce how much time I'm spending on it. You know, maybe I just got a little overambitious this last week. So we'll see what happens. Again, I need to dial back how much time I'm spending on it. But I don't want to release a bad product. I don't want to release a show that's not edited because I end up cutting a lot of length. Like this piece that I'm recording the next day on Monday is taking a lot longer than I expected it would. So there's going to be more editing for me to do because I don't have a strict outline. And I don't like strict outlines. That's why kind of yesterday I was working off an outline. It wasn't strict. I didn't script everything I said, but I still don't necessarily enjoy working off an outline. But I am finding that an outline greatly helps me reduce how much time I'm spending thinking about what I'm saying and how many times I have to edit what I said to fix it. So anyway, just follow along with me. Stay tuned. You will see what I end up doing. And if you have any thoughts on what you think I should do, drop it down in the comments or send me an email. So with all that out of the way, if you're listening to the show via your favorite podcast app and want to hear more, please make sure to follow the podcast. And if you like what you hear, please leave a rating or review in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever that option is available. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And remember to leave your comments down below. Check out my books and other creative projects at indianagym.wordpress.com. You'll find links there to wherever you like to purchase your ebook titles. Go to indianagym.substack.com where you can subscribe to my author newsletter. You'll also find more in-depth examinations of the craft of writing, analysis of story in books, movies, and TV shows, and authentic essays about the creative life and even mental health every now and again. If you are on the X platform, follow me at Indiana Jim. If you prefer Blue Sky, if that's more your speed, you may follow me at Indiana-Jim. So with that all being said, thank you everyone for listening. You have chosen wisely.